Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Tackling Sport podcast. It's Wednesday evening. We're recording here. It's your host Daniel Hussey, joined as always by my brother Sean. Sean, how's it going?
Oh, good, Daniel.
Yeah, listen, world of sport, a lot going on. We're going to focus on a football podcast this week, and going forward, we're looking at getting a few other sports done. There'll be a little bit of a GA update, cricket update potentially as well. So a lot of good stuff going on. If you are enjoying the podcast, do leave us a parental preview on Spotify or Apple, and welcome along. And if you're watching on YouTube on any of our clips that we've clipped out, this will be the full video, but there are a lot of other clips available. 10, 15 minutes that if people want to watch different sections and stuff like that. And timestamps will be in the description on your podcast feed as well. So yeah, first topic, Sean, we want to talk about. So we're going to focus mainly on the Premier League here today. Is Steven Gerrard on Aston Villa? What are your thoughts on what's going on there? Because for a variety of reasons, I listen to a lot of Aston Villa fans. I listen regularly to an Aston Villa podcast, believe it or not, because I know the guy involved there, and it's a brilliant listen, to be honest with you. But they've given up on Steven Gerrard big time. From what you've seen of them, is there any way back for Gerrard, or is it just like a matter of time before that he gets the bullet here?
No, and I listened to that Villa podcast as well on Sunday evening. With Colin Dardy, it's a brilliant podcast. I'm sure even football fans will love to listen to it. But everything that you hear about the Steven Gerrard with Aston Villa, it just feels like it's completely a mismatch. It just seems to have gone really sour very quickly. Very. It feels very difficult for Gerrard to get the fans back on side. A lot of fans that I've seen on Twitter and stuff and listening to a few things, it seems like they've gone away from what they had under Dean Smith, which was a real fighting spirit. That run they went on the championship, you think of the players they had, with kind of Hourihane, Grealish when he was there, and under Gerrard just seems to it hasn't started well from this year, and obviously he's been unlucky with injuries. You have to say that. Brings in Carlos as marquee sign and gets injured. Brings in Kamara in midfield, gets injured, and then it's very hard to go from that. And he's had to do a bit of making up to do with Tyrone Mings, who's actually been really impressive in the last few weeks. But he keeps talking about lack of quality and a lack of creativity. But Gerrard's been there long enough that he should have put his stamp into the Villa side by now, and it really isn't working for him. And I think if you're an Aston Villa fan, the first time I noticed how poor they were was against Arsenal last year when towards the running. It was a 1-0 victory for Arsenal. Arsenal got Saka scored early in the first half, but Aston Villa were absolutely appalling. They offered very little. And you think that it seemed to bring a bit of a spark. Coutinho joined the club in January, but it just seems like he's almost getting in the way because they've got Emi Buendia, who I've watched for a long time at Norwich when he's in the Championship, and he absolutely teared it up for Norwich, and also played very well in his first season in the Premier League, but the year before COVID. And you watch him now; he's only getting 10 minutes here or 15 minutes here off the bench, and Coutinho's the man, and they've got two strikers and two number 10s, and they haven't got any wingers really. But Leon Bailey has flattered to deceive hugely. So when you're watching the Gerrard team at the moment, it's almost watching two different sides. You're watching the defensive unit and the offensive unit, and there seems to be really little play between the two. There's no play they go from back to front very quickly. There's no real passing through midfield, and you'd be worried for Aston Villa. We've had Andrew Blair-White on this podcast, and as he said on the podcast that I was on with him a couple of weeks before the start of the season, I was talking to him about Villa, and I was like, the one thing about Aston Villa is whatever about European aspirations, which is what their CEO, Christian Perslow, has talked an awful lot about. I was like, you don't want to get dragged into a relegation battle, and with how they've started the season and the last two, the performances in particular, I'm not even talking about the results, you'd be really worried for Gerrard's job in particular at the moment, and also Aston Villa getting involved in that kind of 15th, 16th place relegation area.
Yeah, like you said, it's not even necessarily the results. That performance against Southampton, and Hasenhüttl is under massive pressure there as well. But that game was a disgrace of a football match. It was so boring, and things are bad when a team ekes out a win like that. And yes, it is really boring. But I didn't feel the love, the atmosphere in the stadium. I didn't feel the love for Steven Gerrard, and when that happens in a club, it's very hard to get back now. I always kind of bring back to Arteta with Arsenal, just because that's a sign of and it's not laziness in terms of always referring back to it, but it's a good kind of starting point to how, a process going through it. But even in those very low points with Arteta, there was definitely something there that you just clung on to, maybe even if it was the young players, or before that was the FA Cup win before he brought through the young players, where there's just nothing here outside of those for the first 10 games where Gerrard got off to that great start.
Yeah, and you're right there. There's something to cling on to, and as a football fan, when you hear talk of projects and progression, and give managers time, you want to have something to hold on to. And for Villa, it's very little. Obviously, they've got Jacob Ramsey, who is, every time I watch them, he looks their best player. And I was his brother's on loan at Norwich, I think, with Dean Smith, which is an interesting kind of take on that as well. And then there's a lot of talk about this Cameron Archer, their young centre forward, who's been with the England 21s. He's on loan last year at Preston, I think it was. And even Gerrard got asked a question in his press conference the other day, and he was very, very quick to come back at a journalist question why he kept asking about why Archer wasn't playing, which is never a good sign. I think when a manager is kind of like that in the media and he's under pressure, I think it's that there's really naturally one outcome. In fairness to Steven Gerrard, he's going to have to try and come out punching, but his side is lacking any real bite, any real bit of personality in front of goal, any real confidence. There was a couple of chances for Villa on Sunday, but again, they weren't clear-cut chances. They weren't real distinct patterns of play. And like I said, if you're an Aston Villa fan, you're not happy with what you've seen. You've been promised a lot. They got rid of a very popular manager at the time, Dean Smith, who was an Aston Villa fan growing up. You've taken them back into the Premier League and, had them playing really good football. I know it had gone a little bit sour towards the end of his reign, but Aston Villa's Christian Purslow and the owners obviously have big ambitions, but they're kind of going down the Everton route at the moment, where they're talking a big game and seem to be signing players to appease the fans, but on big wages, but doesn't seem to be translating to the pitch yet. And as I said, Aston Villa, they've been in the Championship a couple of times now in the last few years, and there's very few clubs that are too big to go down. And Aston Villa at the moment, well, I think their saving grace is there is 2 or 3 teams that are going to be worse than them this year. But if they keep trying out performances like they have in the last 2 weeks, I've had the misfortune to watch them the last couple of times. Steven Gerrard will say, look, we've taken 5 points from City, Southampton and Leeds, but I think it's the manner of the last 2 performances that would worry Villa fans. And also they have a huge game now Monday night under the spotlight against Nottingham Forest, where both managers are under big pressure. And you often see it when 2 managers are under pressure, the clubs aren't afraid to pull the plug if they lose that game. So Gerrard it's not going to be an easy game at the City ground as well for Villa.
Yeah, we've seen it a lot. Like it's Premier League managers have always been under pressure, but I don't think I've ever heard as many rumours about Premier League managers getting sacked and at the bottom. One thing to note, and Brendan Rodgers arguably wasn't sacked, or probably not even up for debate. Probably wasn't sacked because of his contract situation, where I think there's rumoured talks of anywhere between 10 and 20 million payout left in his contract. So, but it's funny then seeing if Rodgers was sacked, Leicester might have won 4-0 at Forest, and everyone would have been like, that's the right decision. But arguably that international break gave Rodgers a chance to reset, and I know Forest should have gone 1-0 up, but Leicester were quite impressive, and they do still have a great team, so they could kick on and maybe aim for a top 10 finish all of a sudden after losing 7 of their first 8 games, which is absolutely amazing. So on that side of things, you think maybe give a manager like Gerrard a bit more patience and go weather the storm, but at some point you've got to see in that sort of sense, you've got to see the way that it's going. And when there's no, like, even that City game, there was no way that there was no atmosphere and connection with the fans. It's I don't know, it's hard to see a way back from in that sense. But I am kind of interested in that point with Rodgers, that he has kind of weathered the storm there, and they stuck with him, but because they had to. Where these Premier League chairmen are just pushing the button there maybe a bit too soon all the time. You even saw it there with the Wolves manager and Bruno Lage, that arguably Wolves have been playing well and they were just missing Diego Costa. They bring in Diego Costa and they sack him 2 weeks later.
Yeah, and the thing I would say about Villa, the difference with that is that it's the idea, and it's sometimes the managers, and we were talking about Stephen Kenny, the Ireland manager, and how when you're a manager of a Premier League club or an international side, you get almost judged as well on how you perform in the media. And what Steven Gerrard is talking about and some of the things he's saying would really frustrate Villa fans. So he was talking about, we came to Ellen Road to frustrate Villa. Now, I originally heard that in the interview straight away, and I thought,
or frustrate Leeds, obviously, yeah.
Sorry, frustrate Leeds, sorry,
yeah.
And they went there to frustrate the opposition. And I listened to that originally, and I went, geez, that was interesting. It was a bit of a weird one. Then listened to that Villa podcast and heard their frustration at it. And, you're judged also on what the things you're saying, and even the things that the issues Gerrard had with Mings taking the captaincy off and giving it to John McGinn, who hasn't exactly pulled up much trees this season, although played really well for Scotland in those 3 games in the break. But again, there seems to be rumblings of disconnect there between Gerrard, the fans, and it doesn't feel like it's going to change anytime soon. But as I say, it's very easy in the league now with how busy October is to go on a run of 2 or 3 wins and you parachute yourselves up the table. Look where Fulham and Newcastle are at the moment. That and Newcastle haven't had an amazing start to the season. They've been a little bit poor, but they're safely in the top half. And Everton with a 6-game unbeaten run in the league, they've pushed themselves back up there. So it's Gerrard's in a really difficult position. It's probably not a position he would have faced really in his time at Rangers, but this is a big worry for him. And like I said, if he was to be sacked in the morning, I don't think he could have too much complaints, because I think it's 6 league goals they've scored this season or something very poor. They've just been all over the shop going forward, and he can't turn around and keep saying, well, we lack quality, we lack this. I mean, he's got Coutinho, Buendia, proven goal scorers in Danny Ings and Watkins, paid big money for Leon Bailey. So he has to find a way of weathering the storm, because it's difficult, because again, Villa have all these big lofty plans. Their owners have big plans, but if God forbid if they were to be plummeted down into the relegation zone or have a relegation battle, those plans go high in the sky and they have to start again. So it's I don't think, if this continues another couple of weeks down, another couple of games, I think Gerrard will be given his marching orders. But I'm sure, when you see Bruno Lage getting sacked now and Wolves haven't appointed someone straight away, like if Gerrard gets sacked, I think Christian Perslow and everyone in Villa has to have the next man ready in, or the next person in to sort it out, because you can't sack a manager and then try and have this game of trying to take, say, Wolves want to get Lopetegui from Sevilla, and what if he doesn't go, and then you're your second, third choice. So Villa, if they do push the button on Gerrard, they have to have someone ready and wait.
And last thing I want to mention on this is, and something you brought up to me when we were watching the Liverpool Rangers game together, that Steven Gerrard was at Anfield, and it made me think that. And then look, this is rightly or wrongly, and people are fully entitled to. And he's played for Liverpool for years. You were just saying about an Aston Villa fan, and I find it hard to disagree. And the more I thought about it, I'm like, outside of maybe a golf course or La Liga that Pep Guardiola was pictured recently at, but you don't really see Klopp, Pep Guardiola, Conte, Arteta out and about outside of matches now. And you can argue, yes, Gerrard was looking to see Liverpool, but you mentioned to me that they're not playing Liverpool for a good while, so he doesn't even have that to hang his hat on there. So what were your thoughts there? Like, I'm just again thinking of Aston Villa fans that I don't know if I'd be too happy if I saw Arteta out and about, maybe at a City game and with all his buddies after Arsenal had lost 3 or 4 games in a row or whatever.
Well, I do think it's going to be one of the big issues for Steven Gerrard, and it has been throughout his whole what will be his managerial career now. And obviously, when he's at Rangers, he was away from any sort of links to Liverpool, but he's still openly talking about Liverpool. And Wayne Rooney did it when he was Derby manager, talked about Manchester United in his press conferences, which I wouldn't personally be a huge fan of. But like I said, on Gerrard, like, he's so intrinsically linked with Liverpool, it's always going to be hard for him to have another Premier League club. And it was always said about him, when he took over a Villa. But I think the optics of when you're struggling, and I don't think it looks great. And like I said, it's another stick maybe for him to be beaten with. But as I said, like there's some things you probably shouldn't do when you're under pressure as Villa manager, and I don't think going to Liverpool Rangers, even though he has a connection to both clubs in the Champions League, is probably the best idea.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It just mean it's the optics of it, and like everything, rightly or wrongly, things are ultimately about optics a lot of the time, and it's the same in that regard. So cool. We'll chat a little bit about James Maddison, and I have to say, firstly, on a slightly side topic, watching M&F throughout was brilliantly. And ordinarily, the game sort of gets in the way of the analysis, but I think the best part of Monday Night Football was post game and the interviews with Brendan Rodgers and James Maddison. Now, I'm not really sure where exactly this troublemaker thing is coming from. You might know a little bit more than I do, Sean, but it seemed that Gary had, I don't know if you saw it on Twitter or something, but he asked Brendan Rodgers. He seemed a bit surprised by that, and he was like, "Well, yeah, obviously you've seen his hair, you've seen, you should see the cars he used to and the clothes he used to wear." But he settled down into a brilliant professional, brilliant young lad. And then Gary actually asked the same question to Maddison directly, which fair play to him for asking the tough questions. But we can get into Gary Neville on another day regarding Qatar and all the other stuff he's been doing, but. I really was impressed with the way James Maddison spoke post game about being as disappointed being the England squad, and then you look at his performance and you think England don't really have that type of player that he has probably the abilities Ward Prowse has from a set piece, but he can also stay in the middle, stay high. And I know they're not playing a number 10 at the moment, but for Leicester at times he's sort of playing from the left as well when interlinking with Harvey Barnes. So in my head, I can't really see a reason for Maddison not to be in the squad just because he's so different, and that's not to mention all the goals and assists, and I think he's second outside Harry Kane over the last couple of seasons. So, but leaving all that aside, I think the what he brings to a team is such a good option to have off the bench, and it's probably a similar conversation with Trent as well. So, what are your thoughts on James Maddison, the England squad? And one thing, when you always say, "Oh, this guy should be the England squad," who would you maybe bring out then? Because that's obviously Gareth Southgate has to think of that as well, where other football fans wouldn't be doing that, obviously.
Yeah, well, I think on Maddison and some of the probe and maybe Gary Neville was doing, like there was an incident I think where he was in an England squad and got sick when he was over, and he might be in the Czech Republic game, and then he was spotted in a casino, and while England were still on duty. So I think there was a few issues in the past with James Maddison, but as you know, Dan, I don't think anyone's been a bigger fan of James Maddison for the last 4 or 5 years than me ever. I saw him a couple of times for Norwich when he was there, and he was absolutely outstanding. And then he made that move to Leicester, and a lot of people were kind of questioning it, but I think it was the perfect move for him at the time, and I think that was his 50th Leicester goal. He's been an outstanding player for them, but the reason Brendan Rodgers has got the best out of James Maddison is because he's almost built the whole team around him. And what I mean by that is you look at the midfield three that Leicester have traditionally played for a long time. It's been Ndidi, Tielemans and Maddison. So he's got the insurance policy in Ndidi, protecting the back four, screen it. And up until his injury a year or so ago, he was outstanding. He's been slow and been a little bit less effective ever since. But Leicester have had their issues at the back as well. And Yuri Tielemans and Maddison are kind of linked in how they work on the pitch. So for the reason Maddison is so successful for Leicester is the amount of times he can get the ball sort of between the centre half and the midfield of the opposition. But to get that, it's kind of the hardest pass to play in football, that one that beats the midfield two and allows Maddison to say turn on goal and play a pass in the final third. So if you watch Tielemans and Maddison, the amount of times that the ball will go from Tielemans into Maddison's feet, and Leicester can go forward and attack it with real danger. So I think if he plays for England, England don't naturally have that kind of number 8 or that midfielder, that whatever you want to call it, that can play those passes through the line, those quick passes to quicken up the play. And again, that's maybe another element as to why Gareth Southgate is playing the 5 at the back. He it's such a difficult ball to play, and you can get hurt on a counter attack or in transition if you misplace it.
And so, just on that, Sean, with the, so obviously England don't play that way, but like you see something, in fairness, Arteta didn't have this before, but something he's done quite well is have that plan B now for when Arsenal are chasing a game. Southgate's got to be thinking, if I need a goal, and sometimes it is as simple as that, I need a goal. This guy is an attacking player, but he's also well capable of scoring in and around the edge of the box. And you saw the way he kept them. M&F did a great job of showing the way he stays in the middle and gets that shot away or can pop a pass. So off the bench then. So I think the formation thing, yes, I agree. And that's probably ultimately why he's not in the squad. But you've got to also be thinking of those last 30 minutes, and particularly given the fact you can make 5 substitutions now across all codes of football.
No, I'd have Maddison there, and I think it is a 26-man World Cup squad now, so you've got those 3 extra players. They've kind of relaxed the rules. I think it's all around the congestion of games. And I no doubt have Maddison there for his set pieces. But also just like, and as in Brendan Rodgers touching on his natural idea, and when things are going against it, he still wants the ball. He'll still take the ball. He'll still look to create, and he's always done that when he was kind of playing alongside Wes Hoolahan at Norwich, or even you look at him in Leicester's poor run. He's still been the one that's kind of driving the team forward, and he's at that age now where he is mature, and he's still got his good years ahead of him as well. And I'd no doubt have him in the England squad. He's also Irish qualified, so I'm sure if Gareth Southgate doesn't want him, I think he'd be absolutely perfect for Stephen Kenny's plans. But I think he is a little bit different to anything England have. I think the closest is maybe a Mason Mount. The way Grealish and Foden, because they play under Guardiola, they're a little more on the wing, a bit more on the side. Saka's turned himself into a right winger. And there is probably that traditional number 10 position, even though England don't play it, that is normally the role. If they do play a 4-3-3, would be the role of Mount. And I definitely think Maddison will be in the squad as sort of a backup to Mason Mount. And again, someone to bring on off the bench late in the game, which are 5 subs to create. But he's a brilliant player, James Maddison. He's one of the even I follow him on Instagram. He's great. He's great. Kind of value for everything. Big darts fan, loves the sport. Plays
big football fan, like they was mentioned, football man.
But he plays football the right way and comes out and expresses himself. And he's got so much quality, right foot and left foot. And again, he's probably been one of them when Leicester were 5th in the league. They finished out 2 years in a row. He was probably going under the radar slightly, even though they were still finishing 5th. And there was a lot of link with him to go to Newcastle, and he could be exactly what Newcastle need, because again they've got when fit Bruno Guimaraes in that midfield, kind of linking the play nicely. But you do wondering, he was a lot of links with joining Arsenal at one stage. Obviously, Arsenal elected for Martin Odegaard. But Maddison is a sensational player, but I think he's one of them who suits the team being built around him almost, and it's not something he'll get at England, but he's definitely valued to bring off the bench. There's no doubt about that.
Well, you ultimately always see the best out of 10s when the team's built around them, like Odegaard at Arsenal. That didn't happen overnight. At times he wasn't great last season, but the team is literally built around Martin Odegaard at the moment, and it's the same, I guess, with James Maddison. So you can see some of the reasons why Southgate doesn't have him in the starting lineup. You can say the same things about Trent, but to not be in the squad, I think it. Look, sometimes a performance like that, I know it shouldn't be judged on one performance at home to Nottingham Forest, but I think given how big a game was for Leicester and the spotlight it was on Monday Night Football, you'd assume he's probably going to make the squad. So, fine. Anything else said on James Maddison, Sean? You're just a big fan. You think he should be in the squad?
Yeah, no, but again, he has to keep going on this, and trying to force his way into the squad, because Southgate is a little bit rigid, and he doesn't like he's one of them. He probably doesn't want change. He doesn't want different characters into the group. But Maddison is again, like, it just shows you the talent England have. That Maddison will get most squads around Europe and around a lot of the World Cup squads. So he's an exceptional player.
No, he is for sure, and we wish him best luck. Hope he makes it. I think he just will. So, looking ahead to some of the Premier League games this weekend, the one that stands out is the 4:30 game, Arsenal versus Liverpool. Now, if you told me, start the season, summertime, anytime you like, really, that Arsenal will go into this game, I think it's a 50-50 game. Essentially, the bookmakers have made it. You'd be laughed out of the place considering some of the odds Arsenal have gone off against Liverpool in the past. What are you going to make of where these two teams are at? I think, I'm kind of going into the game thinking, as an Arsenal fan, that it's the perfect time to play Liverpool given the form they're in. But you kind of touched on me off air that it's probably the worst time, considering they'll be motivated for this game. Klopp, for the first time in ages, has been written off. Mo Salah's been written off. But you saw a few signs in that Rangers game, albeit at the opposition, that this could be a very, very big performance coming from Liverpool on Sunday.
Yeah, No, I'm actually intrigued, and even watching Haaland the other day from Man City, I was intrigued to see how Arsenal will cope with him with Saliba, with Ben White, with Gabriel, and that back four that's really set in stone at the minute with Zinchenko, and you have the option of bringing in Tierney, which he might against Liverpool. Tierney has a decent enough record against Salah. Like Salah still, he's got a great record against most teams. But 1-on-1, you'd fancy Tierney a little bit more than Zinchenko in defensive areas. But there's two ways of looking at it. It'll be a test of Arteta's resolve and way he doesn't want to change for anyone if he plays Zinchenko. And similar with Klopp, if he goes there and plays that 4-2-3-1 that works so well against, not that it worked so well against Rangers, but the reason it worked was the ability for Jota to get in those places and spaces rather, and link up with Núñez and Salah a lot more.
Just on that, would that mean dropping Fabinho or not bringing him in again?
No, well, I'd bring Fabinho in and maybe put Fabinho and Henderson and maybe drop a Thiago and think you're not going to get as much as the ball against Arsenal and try and hit them more in that kind of transition or the counter-attack way. But again, it would be a statement from Klopp to go to do that and go and win and beat Arsenal by playing a 4-2-3-1. I think he might play it a little bit safe and go 4-3-3. Jota's got a brilliant record against Arsenal. I think he might go Salah, Jota, and Diaz, and maybe give Núñez a rest. But he's got a lot of options, and that's the one thing that would surprise you about Liverpool this season. I know they haven't played well, is that bar midfield, like they have a pretty decent squad. Like that, Firmino's been probably their standout player in the league this season, and again, he's got a fabulous record. They all seem to have great records against Arsenal, but he has that ability as well to kind of play in that position Jota did against Rangers. So it's a huge test for both sides. If Liverpool lose this, it's a lot of people say they're out of the title race now, but they're in a huge battle for Champions League honours, even so early in the season. But if they win, I still think they'll finish above Arsenal. But it's a huge chance for Arsenal to play the way they've been playing this season. They've been very impressive. I think a lot will be on. We see the photo there in the background, Trent Alexander-Arnold and Martinelli, and it was you forget that in March time or April time last year when the two sides played, it was a huge game for both teams, with Arsenal going for top four and Liverpool going for the league title, and Liverpool found a way of winning, even though it was a big test for them that night. And it was an interesting battle between Martinelli and Alexander-Arnold. And Martinelli's a real live wire; he'll keep running at you. But I know Alexander-Arnold got turned a couple of times, but I didn't think overall he didn't do a bad job. Obviously he's come under criticism defensively. We know his ability in the final third, but defensively he was poor in the last couple of weeks. So it's a big game for him, and if he can come out of that test clean and with a clean sheet, and it just proves again to Southgate and to the doubters that he can do it. But it's going to be a brilliant game, but a huge game for Arsenal. I think if Arsenal offered Arteta a point now, I think he'd take it. But Arsenal have a good record at the Emirates in recent.
Their Emirates record. Well, it's usually particularly it was initially their record against bottom half teams, but I guess over the last few months they've accumulated a couple of good results against Spurs, etc. But yeah, on that and Arsenal's lineup, while I kind of agree, you could argue Tierney might come in. I just think, and I touched on this with you off air before, that Arteta spent his first season giving up his principles to get a back five to the squad of players he had to win an FA Cup. He then started bringing young players through, but at times he would have had to sit in, park the bus at Anfield, park the bus at Etihad, and various other away games, particularly like Old Trafford, for example, getting dominated out of possession. But I just think now he has a team, and he'll feel this team can compete with a Liverpool, maybe not Liverpool last season, but a Liverpool at the moment, that I think 100% Zinchenko's his man. I don't think the more I watch Zinchenko, he was brought in for the small teams, do you know what I mean? Or maybe a home game against Spurs at max. I think he was brought in to dominate a game like this. So I just think Arteta has finally got a squad of players and finally got a starting 11, particularly starting 11, maybe not the squad yet, that is built on his principles, and that is ultimately a Zinchenko playing, and then Ben White, it's sort of at times a back three. Zinchenko can come in the middle, Xhaka can go forward, Partey centre mid, and that front three and front four with Odegaard takes care of itself. So I'd be very surprised if Tierney comes into the team. And I have to say, in fairness to him, his performances have gotten better and better since his injury. And I know he's had the concussion thing since. And you could see he was buzzing to come on and make an impact at Spurs. He's disappointed with his shot. If you watch the Arsenal fan, or not the fan cam, the bench cam, I don't think Arteta was overly impressed with him going for that shot either at the time, given the score. We were 2 goals up, a few minutes left. So I think ultimately Zinchenko's Arteta's man. He'll go with him. That's why he'll ultimately go with Jesus. Ultimately go with the players he's brought in. I guess most of them are now. So that's it. And the last thing on Arsenal, and look, I'm the lads will tell you here. I was watching the game now. I forgot I couldn't really walk, so I went to celebrate the opening goal, and I only got as far as standing up. Had to sit down. Second goal, I gave it a good cheer while sitting down. But the third goal, when Granit Xhaka scored that goal, Sean, I'm not gonna lie, it was close as I probably had to tears in my eyes watching Arsenal and supporting Arsenal since really 2001 was my first memory, but I guess properly, over the last 10, 15 years, particularly those latter Wenger years. But to see Granit Xhaka come through what he has done, and look, not a lot of people backed him, but we definitely backed him on the podcast. Well, I think I definitely backed him on the podcast. You did to a point. You were somewhere in the middle, and then we had other people on who didn't. But I think what he's gone through there to come back from throwing the armband down, and look, I was never a fan of booing him off the pitch that day because he was just frustrated. He showed a human element and a human reaction, and the fans got on his back. And I understand in a ground like that, people were frustrated at him getting off, but I can see why Xhaka reacted like that. And some of the nonsense you read about him over the last couple of years, and to a point, some of the nonsense I'm reading now, where it's like, oh, Xhaka is finally playing his best stuff because he's in his best position, and absolutely, he's that position arguably gets the best out of Granit Xhaka. But Granit Xhaka doesn't play in that position for Switzerland. He plays as a deep line midfielder that he has for Arsenal over the last few years. So it's not just a box to box midfielder that Granit Xhaka is. He can also play deep line midfielder, and in my opinion, has been playing very well for Arsenal over the last 2.5, 3 seasons. But without those goals, assists, and people see that, it's very hard to back a player like Granit Xhaka when he'll make a mistake that will ultimately cost Arsenal a goal. But in my opinion, in the long run, will get you far more keeping the ball, getting Arsenal moving and trying to pass. And he's been Arteta's key man for the last 2.5, 3 seasons. So while I accept he's gone on to a new level with this box-to-box midfielder, and yes, it is definitely ultimately, well, we're looking at the last 6, 7 weeks, it's definitely his best position. I think he's been a consistent performer for Arsenal for the last 2.5, 3 seasons. And this bollocks you read that with red cards, and he's got this reputation. I think it's 4 Arsenal red cards in his career, none in the last couple of years. So outside the City game, I think so. That's probably one in the last couple of seasons. So for me, and I actually don't think that was a red card, but for me, his reputation's gone before him a lot and the only way he would ever have rescued his reputation was scoring goals and assists in a box-to-box role and getting on the ball and passing around. So I want to get your take on Xhaka in general, but I don't think this point's been made at all that he's not just a box-to-box midfielder. He has been playing well in the deep line role with Partey before Zinchenko came on the scene. But yeah, he's gone on to a new level now, and it's a weird feeling seeing love for a player that you back, because I get plenty of things wrong, but when you get something half right, you kind of feel. I don't know. I just got very emotional. I see a leader in Granit Xhaka that I hadn't seen a leader on this team since Thierry Henry. So I'd like to get your take on his performances, because he's been unbelievable, hasn't he?
I think you mentioned there he's Mikel Arteta's man. I think if you were to probably pick 3 players that best sum up the job Arteta's done, you'd probably pick Saka because he's nearly played every minute. You'd probably pick Ramsdale because a lot of people were questioning the sign. He's turned out to be a huge success. But I think most importantly, you pick Granit Xhaka. Like you see where Xhaka was mentally, where he was with the Arsenal fans when Arteta took over, to where he is now. His name being sung all around the Emirates and in away grounds, and he's got that smile on his face and he's enjoying his football. I think it just shows how big a job Mikel Arteta has done. And he immediately came in, recognised the importance of Xhaka, not just to the on the pitch, but also in the dressing room. And I think it also proves how poor an appointment Unai Emery was as Arsenal manager. And you look at the players and what Unai Emery tried to do. He tried to control the dressing room as much as possible and tried to get rid of people who've been there a while, like Wilshere and Ramsey, and players who've been in the background and brought in a lot of different characters that very few are still here playing and thriving. But you have to give credit to Unai Emery for giving Bukayo Saka his Arsenal debut. But what I would say about Xhaka is, in recent, if you watch him, like his left foot has always been outstanding. We haven't. The one thing you would have always said is you probably haven't seen enough goals from him. You haven't seen him in enough creative areas, and that's the one thing he has brought to his game since the start of the season. But I think Arsenal fans, and very reflectful and very straight Arsenal fans, would say Xhaka's probably been him and Saka being the two players over the last year or 2 months that have been consistent, that have been there, and nearly every game playing, rarely injured. And Xhaka is the heartbeat at the Arsenal side, and he's playing his best football now, of course. But as you said, like he's been getting criticism for a long time, and people saying he can do daft things, and that. Then for me, I watch Fabinho. Fabinho makes it. Obviously, Fabinho's in a different level to Xhaka, but when Fabinho makes a foul, it's not a big deal. Let's say when a Xhaka makes a foul, and Fabinho, if you watch him, does make an awful lot of yellow card tackles that he might get away with. But as I said,
and a player like Rodri as well.
Yeah, exactly. And Jack has just been, to see him now and to see the transition from where he was when Arteta took over to where he is now, I think highlights what a brilliant job Arteta has done. Still an awful long way to go, and there is a question about whether he can go that extra step with Arsenal. But whatever you would say is, if Arteta was to go in the morning, the person taking over from him is in a far superior place to now than if he had taken over when Arteta did. And I think that's highlighted in Xhaka. And as I said, ever since that Switzerland performance against France in the Euros, he's just seemed to have gone on another level. I think he's been rejuvenated by the signings of Jesus and Zinchenko, because I think they've brought that winning mentality that he has. He's always had that. He's always demanded a lot from his teammates, probably a little bit too much on the pitch at times, with a couple of red cards and trying to be a little bit too forceful. But I definitely think he's looking at Saliba coming in as well, particularly Jesus and Zinchenko, and gone, we are stepping forward again. Because there was an incident after the Newcastle game where he came out and spoke last year when Arsenal lost, to really dent all hope of Champions League football. And he came out and said, we need to be more brave, and we need to play and don't go hiding. And I think he was right in the sense that Arsenal never tried to build from the back in that game. It was kind of, let's try and protect what we have. And we were, obliterated by Newcastle. It could have been a lot worse than what it was. But as I said, he's looking around that dressing room thinking it's not going to happen this year. It could well happen, but I think he feels that. And then also you got to give credit to the fans who, got a song going from the obviously the whole atmosphere at the Emirates changed. Give a shout out to the Ashburton Army. They're doing brilliant work getting the atmosphere and the clock in. And even when Arsenal conceded, the penalty goes in, and Kane scores, the roar then is for the players to go again. And it all started with that City game on, I think it was January 1st.
New Year's Day, yeah.
New Year's Day, when Arsenal were very unlucky to lose that to a penalty decision on poor old Xhaka, which was harsh.
Yeah, forgot about that.
A late Rodri goal. But from ever since that, the Arsenal fans sung them off the pitch, and they've seen something in this team. And I think Xhaka reflects the change, and he's been outstanding so far this season, and long may it continue. And one thing you always say is, and people always say, every manager who he plays for, they pick him. And also his fitness record, touch wood, has been absolutely outstanding since he's joined Arsenal. So he's a brilliant player, and from, as I said, the journey he's gone on the last 3 years, I don't think I've seen it in many clubs before with many players. I think there's probably a handful of players where they've gone from zero to hero, but I think Xhaka is on that track. And can you imagine the redemption story ending with a Premier League title?
You got too far into that sentence to back out. Yeah.
No, I must say that it was a brilliant line from Darren Fletcher on BT when he said, "From the outhouse to the penthouse," and I think that sums up Xhaka now. Yeah. He's the main man at Arsenal, and he's the one player now at the minute that it seems to be holding, seems to be the glue that's holding a lot of it together.
And not BT Sports' biggest fan of their coverage, but the commentary from Fletcher there and at that game and for the goals was, and I listened to Peter Jury's one after, and the biggest comment I'll give to Fletch. I actually call him Fletch now that I can't even remember his first name. Is it Stephen Fletcher or doesn't matter? Yeah, what's the name, sorry? Darren Fletcher. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that. And I just thought they were pretty similar, which kind of is the biggest compliment I can give to him. Last thing on the Arsenal fans and Granit Xhaka, and you touched on it a little bit in terms of Emery, Wenger always picking him. I think Granit Xhaka, rightly or wrongly, he was a victim of the timing he came into Arsenal. Like he's come in and Arsenal have literally not been in the Champions League since then. So, in fairness, I understand how Arsenal fans got on his back when you see the red cards, when you see the stupid stuff that he has done and given away penalties, absolutely for sure. But I agree with everything you say there, and I do think that the bigger picture should have been seen on that, and that winning mentality he has. And you saw it the way he played in Switzerland. He actually played very well in the international break as well for Switzerland. And yeah, I'm delighted for him. But again, I also think he has played well for a long time outside this season. He's just taking it to a new level because of that new position. But yeah, absolutely delighted for him in fairness. So last thing, yeah, Sean?
Last thing I'd say is you got to give him credit, because you look at how hard a position Harry Maguire's in now with all the social media stuff we talked about before. It's ridiculous. But Xhaka was in a similar position, if not worse, and he was getting an awful lot of abuse from whoever, these anonymous accounts or whatever it was. And his father, maybe if you listen to a few interviews he's done, his father said it's not worth the hassle. Mourinho would come in, that Rome at the time, other clubs would come in, that leave, don't give Arteta the time of day. And he stuck by it, he stuck through it, and fair play to him. And his, like, you look at that mental strength, it is outstanding, and it's pretty unique in modern day players. You don't see that kind of resilience. It's kind of it's not a rare quality as maybe you would have seen 10 or 15 years ago, or maybe it's perceived that way. But Xhaka showed immense resilience to hold through, even with the kind of social media backlash he got at different times.
Yeah, and I just on that, he responded to a few, and it suits his personality to do that. And I think it's ultimately up to the individual how people deal with abuse. A lot of people say, "I'll just ignore that stuff," but for him to get through that, particularly when people were saying stuff about his family and his wife and his kid and kids now, I think it suited his, as I said, his personality to come back at that, and I've absolutely no problem with that at all. And to be honest, I'd encourage it for anyone to whatever way they want to deal with it as best they can, you know.
But even I saw an older Arsenal fan put up on Twitter of him meeting Xhaka in kind of a furniture store or whatever, and you can see the smile on Xhaka's face, and it must be brilliant for him to have gone through that relationship with the fans to now being, as I said, top of the ladder, almost top of the tree, alongside Arteta with sort of fan love. So fair play to him.
And just on the personality, like if you might think he's playing a lot into it and he might get carried away, but I think again it suits his personality to do that and to get on top of things and to ride that wave. So yeah, fair play to him. And look, you wish that for a lot of other players. You touched on Harry Maguire. Like, people forget the season United came second, he was one of United's best players, and I wouldn't be a particular high Harry Maguire fan, but I don't think Paul Merson was right at the time in what he said in terms of United, but ultimately the way the team has come around him, and then once his head is gone, he's been absolutely atrocious for the last 6 to 9 months. And to be honest, it was on Southgate to take him out of the team, and Ten Hag, I was surprised he started with him this season. But with social media abuse and stuff, you do like seeing those players kind of proving a point. So maybe that could be the blueprint for a player like Harry Maguire. Who knows? So, because you might laugh now, but we were talking 2 or 3 years ago. In fact, when I was talking, I only got as far as a couple of words because people weren't listening on that side of things. So we'll see. Final point we want to talk about, final game, is Everton versus Manchester United. For those that I don't know about anyone else, but I always want to know the reason why this game is at 7 o'clock on a Sunday. So quick little Google. Shout out Pundit Arena, still doing well, the SEO, my former employers, because they were the first article there. So first article I clicked. And it's essentially BT picked the game as a 12:30 game. I don't know how they were allowed to do that, because this Europa League weekend was always going to be in, and United qualified automatically for the Europa League. However, the reason they gave was it's because there's no more 12:30 games. So you have to, from Europe, so you have to move it to Sunday at 7 now. That was always the case with Europa League. I think BT kind of found a way to pick a game and go hold their hands up and go, look, we want to move this game to 7 o'clock on a Sunday. So maybe it's not ideal timing for the fans, Sean, but that's the reasons that were given. The European, which made no sense to me, because again, it was a Thursday night. United are playing this week, so the game can't, BT would have had to pick another game at 12:30. I think they found a loophole in that new Premier League rule brought in after essentially Jurgen Klopp and Des Kelly's interview there.
But it was also Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was the first manager when I think it was actually United Everton where he said, you set us up to fail.
I think and it's spot on, yeah.
And
I do agree.
the timing's obviously not great, but at least Manchester and Everton and Liverpool are in the northwest for the Manchester fans.
True, that's true.
What
Yeah,
I would
that's true.
I would say about this game is that United need a response. I think United have been let off a lot from their performance against City, and I think they're at the stage where it was a similar stage where Arsenal, where it's acceptance, where it's like, well, we know we're miles off it, so we can excuse a performance like this. And then, to be fair, it seemed like it was only Roy Keane and a little bit of Paul Scholes that I listened to that were hypercritical, and I think them two, certainly remember United of their playing days in the golden era, because I thought United were really poor. Now they have a little bit of money in the bank from beating Liverpool, beating Arsenal, and winning 4 games in a row, but it's a huge game for them now against a really buoyant Everton side. 6 games unbeaten in the league. Frank Lampard 2 wins in a row, and everything seems to be rosy at Goodison Park, whereas United at the moment they're at that phase where they can't seem to get away from the cliff edge of good performance and bad performances, but you're still 1 game away from a catastrophic nightmare. And I think if they were to lose that game, I think they're plummeted back down the mountain
Back
again,
into it.
and they have to build up that reputation slowly. So it's a massive game, and it's obviously one of the last games of the weekend as well. So all eyes will be on it, and to be no getting away from it for United, it's a must win for them.
Yeah.
They want aspirations of Champions League football next year.
Yeah, it's a quirk in the fixture list, so there won't be a game till 3:00 this weekend. But by next weekend, you'll have had a game on 8:00 on Friday and 12:30 on Saturday next weekend. So just shows you. I really do think this is a setup for like Frank Lampard defensive masterclass, where you might see a 0-0 or a 1-0 or 2-1 win for Everton here, because and you touched on it, Sean, that inconsistency in United's performance. I think it all goes back to ultimately their style of play, and right now, or for the last 3, 4, 5 years, by and large, they've been a counter-attacking team. And the way Ten Hag has gone from, after the first 2 games, trying to introduce his principles, absolute shit show. So he ended up going back to a little bit more cautiously, a little bit more long balls. Fully backed up in the stats here. If you want to take a look, David De Gea, I think his long balls compared to short balls was night and day from the 3rd game to the 2nd game. And in fairness, Ten Hag's pragmatic approach has worked. It shows he's adaptable. It shows he's realised, given how big the club is, he's got to try and find a way to get a few results along the way. Not too dissimilar to Arteta, that FA Cup win. You could argue it, Arsenal fluked it a little bit, given the way they set up 5 at the back, but he ended up getting that bottom a lot of time. With Ten Hag, he needs to find a way of doing that. But looking at this game, I just really think Frank Lampard's going to set his team up with that back 5 and really park the bus and really frustrate Manchester United and give them 60-70% of the ball, but play with that bit of pace, that bit of spirit and fight. And Goodison Park will be rocking. They'll get right behind it. You've seen Everton fans on Twitter, on social media, on YouTube comments that they are really behind this manager and Frank Lampard, and all of that is to do with the culture he's building. We spoke about it a couple of weeks ago, Sean. Since then, I know they've only had 1 win since then, or only 1 game and 1 win since then, but it's just that spirit he's ignited into this football club. And you were the first person a few months ago, we were touching on it, I think it was an off-air chat, and you were saying to me, he's probably, if Frank Lampard could work in any Premier League club anymore after his debacle at Chelsea, which I thought I was probably his harshest critic at there, it's Everton. And I've opened my eyes, and since then, all I see is a manager that's connecting with his club. The minute they had that pitch invasion for relegation, I don't think I've ever seen those scenes for a team staying up like that. I've seen pitch invasions and teams celebrate staying up, but there felt like there was more to come from this team. And the expectations from Everton fans during this summer compared to previous summers was, we're happy to stay up. We just want to see a team that's fighting. I might be reading that wrong, but all the previews I watched with Everton fans, they were just happy with Frank Lampard. They know how hard it's going to be. They're after selling Richarlison and Luca Dean the January previous. Let's just find a way to start playing a bit of football. And if we stay up, happy days, and we can build from there, where they've almost exceeded expectations. I know it's only a small sample size, but they have the best defence in the Premier League. And that's all down to Frank Lampard signings. Out and out Frank Lampard sign. This player plays well in the Premier League. Let's bring him in here, this centre-back. Let's build this partnership between Tarkowski and Cody. And we can complicate football a lot, but sometimes it's as simple as getting a solid back. And Tarkowski's been caught in possession a couple of times for Everton, but what's happened is, particularly remember Forest game, that Connor Cody bails him out, or somebody bails him out. They've got Patterson. I know he's a bit injured out at the moment, but you've got Coleman there. Again, he's not been informed, but he's a good backup to have there all of a sudden. And then they signed Mopey. Similar thing with the centre-backs. A good, proven Premier League striker. When I say proven, not in terms of 20 goals a season, that's not what he's going to get you, but it's his running, it's in behind running that Everton haven't had up front since Dominic Calvert-Lewin, who hopefully they can bring back at some point. So pretty exciting times for Everton, and I just can't see a way United get a win here because of the atmosphere at Goodison Park and the atmosphere Frank is building, but also the style of play and how the game's going to go. United are going to have to find a way to pick a team that can be good and with 60% possession and win this game, and maybe they can. So I'll be very interested about 6 o'clock on Sunday when we're watching the Arsenal-Liverpool game to have a look and see what team Ten Hag goes and whether he finds a way of getting more attacking players or more possession-based players on the pitch, perhaps in a less counter-attacking way. And I'm kind of thinking out loud here, is that a return to the team for Cristiano Ronaldo? Probably not, but maybe it's a game that suits his style of play.
Well, it's quite an interesting game because Everton at times they're not afraid to play out from the back. But if you watch Pickford a lot, he an awful lot of the time likes to go long with his kickouts. So if United play like that, I think it might suit Everton a little bit more. If I was Manchester United going there, I think I'd try Casemiro and McTominay and try and beef up that midfield slightly. Everton's midfield, the way they're playing with Iwobi and Onana and Idrissa Gana Gueye now, that kind of midfield three seems to be sort of found itself almost. They're all over the pitch. They're really leggy in terms of the running power that Iwobi and Onana have, and Idrissa Gana Gueye gets around the pitch, despite being in his 30s now. It's as I said, it's a big game. Everton are on a really good run, and Everton have gone away from the stage where if they lose to United now, United will have to have worked really hard to win there, and it would be a difficult win. And I think that's the biggest thing that Lampard's done, is made them harder to beat, but also got them away from the cliff edge in terms of if they lose to United, it's not the end of the world. And whereas when he took over under Benitez, it seemed like every week, I remember they lost to Brentford away under Benitez, and it was car crash stuff. I think it was on Sky. The away fans were going mad. The club was spiraling out of control. But Lampard has calmed them down. He's brought them back from that cliff edge. And that is almost what Ten Hag has did previous to the City game. He steadied the ship, got a couple of wins, took them under a bit more control. But now they're almost, after that City game, they're creeping back towards there. And a bad result at Goodison for Ten Hag, it will push them further and further along. So it's going to be a really interesting game, interesting dynamic. Obviously, always a spicy enough game. A lot of players have played for both clubs. I remember a lot of people. Did Everton beat them 4-0 or something? Do you remember Billy Janovic? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
The winger for Everton, cut inside, hit one right-footed. And it's always a spicy enough game. I remember the game where there was a huge VAR incident with Sigurdsson was kind of in between De Gea and Maguire, and there always seems to be a bit of late drama at these kind of games. So it's a proper Premier League game in that respect, and I'm looking forward to it. And as I said, the biggest compliment I can give Lampard is if Everton lose, it's not the end of the world. But if Ten Hag loses, we're getting crisis talk again. So you have to give credit to Lampard for the job. It'd be interesting. Like, a lot of people have spoken that, do United's late goals give them a sign of something? I think we'll only find out in the next few weeks against, their late goals against City. Does he, Martial was bright when he came on. Does he start him? Rashford was poor. I have to say, if you watch Jadon Sancho's performance at the Etihad, it was absolutely disgraceful. And I really feel for him because he should be a shoo-in for the World Cup squad. You could argue him and maybe Saka buying out for one of those right wing spots, or that kind of other winger position with Sterling. He just looks a shadow of the player they bought. And there was times against Liverpool where he was bright at the start of the season, but against Man City, the amount of times he gave the ball away and was just so poor. And I really like Sancho. I think he's a brilliant player. I think he's kind of a breath of fresh air in that United team. But I'd be interested if Ten Hag keeps faith in him, or does he mix it up? Does he play Martial, Rashford? I wouldn't be surprised to maybe see Anthony, Martial and Rashford up there, because it gives them something different, a lot more pace on that side. Anthony looks bright, but I must say I was so disappointed with how Sancho played against City. And obviously it's a big game from going back to his former club, a club where he was at and Guardiola moved him on to Dortmund. But I just had to say it, I thought he was really poor.
Yeah, sorry, I thought you meant Everton there. I was like, what, Sancho played for Everton? And I was just like, what? And two things on that. Yeah, I think the late goal said more about Manchester City's defence. The amount of injuries they've had there is amazing. So they're definitely gettable at the back of the moment, City. I would say that. And the final player I wanted to bring up, Sean, we spoke a bit about Granit Xhaka. If you are watching the YouTube video here, you can go back and watch our Arsenal versus Liverpool preview. But Granit Xhaka's been ridiculed for so long, but Jordan Pickford's been ridiculed for so long, not by Everton fans, as me and you found out. So to give a bit of a background, myself and Sean, Arsenal fans, we went to Goodison Park with the Arsenal fans away from home, and the support Jordan Pickford got when we were singing England's number 2 to him at 1-0 up, and we were, to be honest, I felt great about myself. And the full time, Everton had just scored to make it 2-1, a minute to go, and the whole stadium erupts with England's number 1, England's number 1. I've been quoted on this podcast before saying I've never really heard an atmosphere like that. It was amazing. And going, well, yeah, they really like this guy and they watch him week in, week out. And he gets not ridiculed from England, but a lot of fans and a lot of people that don't watch him a lot do ridicule him. And he gets a lot of abuse for his height and the size of his hands and a lot of nasty stuff, I guess. I know it's a lot of it's banterful, but it's not great for him to hear. But his performances this season, and I've watched a lot of Everton, and I can see sometimes last season and throughout his career, I do see a lot of like people's, he does like tendencies to be rash, make a mistake, not too dissimilar to Aaron Ramsdale at times. But I definitely think this season he saves the way he's conducted himself. And you don't want to drag that personality out of him of being a showman as a goalkeeper, because you have to be confident to be a goalkeeper. Like, it's just in the nature of the position. But I just think there's an air of confidence now, and he feels accepted at Everton. He's had a few seasons there to establish himself well and truly as the number 1 since moving from Sunderland. Big money move. He's the England number 1. He's been backed throughout by Southgate, and he had a wobble in the middle there, but I definitely feel he was definitely dropped for a few games, wasn't he? But I feel right now the way he's playing is probably the best of his career at Everton, at least, and maybe he can replicate that in an England shirt. I know he missed the couple of Nations League games, but it could be a big World Cup for him as well.
Yeah, no, you're right. There's no doubt Everton fans absolutely love him, adore him, and he's been a brilliant player for them. He's played a lot of Premier League football for again quite young-ish as a keeper. Obviously, he went through a tough time around the whole Virgil van Dijk injury and kind of the social media element. And he's a bit of a character, like you see him when he goes back to Sunderland, and has a bit of banter with the Newcastle fans whenever they play him each other. But he is a brilliant player. That is a brilliant keeper. Is he a world class level of maybe say the top keepers around the world? He's probably a level or maybe so below that. But for Everton, he's absolutely outstanding. Like he won't go down as obviously their greatest ever keeper because of Neville Southall and the legacy he has there. But he's certainly one of the best keepers they've had in the Premier League era, and he's been a brilliant keeper for England. Like his record in saving penalties for England at the World Cup against Colombia, and also obviously against Italy, saving that one from Jorginho, stepped up when it mattered. And he's again, like I said, he probably gets beaten. He probably beats himself at times with his kind of reaction with the fans and stuff, and sometimes again with Ramsdale that can go against you, and it's part of being a goalkeeper and cop and stick from the fans. But there's no doubt he'll be England's number 1. And as I said, the reason he's not the highest level is because, like Ramsdale as well and Dean Henderson, that he just makes one mistake maybe that another keeper wouldn't, and that is just the reason. But some of his performance for Everton, his performance in the Merseyside derby was outstanding, and like I said, he was outstanding. He's been outstanding for them ever since he signed, really, and he's outlived that whole defence, because you look at the money they spent in, and they brought in Michael Keane for big money, Yeremina for big money, Digne, and all these kind of players, and he's been the one constant in that Everton side of being signed in and around that period. So he's it's been funny because he's been Everton, as I look at it, kind of 3 captains with Coleman, Pickford, and Cody, and a lot of the time this year when Coleman hasn't played, Pickford's been captain, and when Pickford hasn't, Cody has. So it's Everton's spine's a lot more secure there now, and he's part of it.
Yeah, last thing on his antics, like you remember the game in Anfield, he was winding up the crowd, and you made the point to me, in fairness, with Ramsdale, when we were at that game, Arsenal were 1-0 up, and the Everton fans weren't with Benitez at the time, or the team particularly. and he started winding the crowd up, and he got him going. And it's a different game with an atmosphere. So I think keepers like that, you big up, like Pickford does in fairness in Goodison Park, you big up the home crowd, but away from home, you can't do that. But look, that's the chat there. Everton mentioned Manchester United. Really looking forward to that game. That's all from the Tackling Sport podcast. Sean, thanks a million for joining us.
Cheers, Dan.
We'll be back next week again. A lot of exciting projects coming up. But for now, enjoy the Premier League football, and we will chat to you next week.